Suzanne Collins made a point to connect her latest work, Sunrise on the Reaping, with George Orwell and his historical works of fiction and their strong anti-oligarchical, pro-individual narratives. Since we've recently read and analyzed 1984 and Sunrise on the Reaping, we felt like it would be a fun discussion to compare and contrast the two works. Join us as we cover topics such as propaganda, the distortion of history, and surveillance, among others.
Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are going to be covering 1984 and Sunrise on the Reaping. I feel like it is a natural place to connect the dots because even Suzanne Collins made the connection between the two in the beginning of the book whenever she put a quote by George Orwell.
It's kind of funny that George Orwell was chosen to be one of the quotes for her book that's about propaganda. While George Orwell was very outspoken against creating propaganda and using it to control the public, he was a part of making propaganda for the British government.
Yeah, it was kind of a weird detail in his history now, isn't it?
So obviously everyone's here for Sunrise on the Reaping. If you're here for 1984, leave a comment. No, I'm just kidding. I want to focus mainly on the propaganda of Sunrise on the Reaping because that's what Suzanne Collins was really aiming for with her intention in writing this book.
No doubt. I feel like even in the interviews, she was making a point that she was really wanting to attack the point of propaganda and the anti-oligarchical kind of concepts that Orwell really covers. I don't feel like I really sensed much of the anti-oligarchical stuff that she was talking about, the idea of the many being ruled by the few, more than just a couple of things here and there. The propaganda points were definitely the prominent point.
So I kind of wanted to cover how the propaganda in Sunrise on the Reaping was used to instill fear in the civilians and to control history, basically rewriting history when it comes to things like the Hunger Games. And by doing those things, it enforces submission. And one of these things that could be seen at the end, obviously whenever Haymitch is seeing his recap of the games, it's nothing like how it actually went. And they made him to seem very unlikable and even cruel at points.
I think that's fair, especially I think in my rereading of Catching Fire, I noticed how whenever Katniss and Peter were going over the film, that the impression that they both got from him, that he was incredibly cocky and full of himself and just kind of a jerk.
And that's covered in greater detail in Sunrise on the Reaping, obviously. Another pertinent detail of propaganda in Sunrise on the Reaping are the signs that are seen during the reaping.
Yeah, specifically with the peacekeepers equal peace or something like that. And then the one about Snow saying that he is our best peacekeeper.
Yeah, and it's very reminiscent of Big Brother, as seen in 1984, so in 1984, we see it from Winston's point of view. He is a middle party member, about lower party member, and he actually rewrites the history, which is really interesting. So that's not a point of view that we get in Sunrise on the Reaping. We kind of get it with Plutarch, how he's like, oh, I'm rewriting history, I'm helping you guys out, actually. Winston obviously does not see it that way. He sees it as malevolent, malicious, not good, and overall a bad thing that he is rewriting history. And at first, he kind of convinces himself oh, this is a good thing, I'm doing it for the people. But once he realizes that he condemned some innocent men, he kind of changes his tune.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of analyze the two different worlds. If I was going to put Winston in Pan Am, we would probably call him a part of the capital with him being a part of the party, right? And then the proletariats would be, let's say, the equivalent of the districts.
Yeah, I completely agree. And though he is a low-ranking member of the party, I would even consider him almost like a lower-level game maker with how much of a grip he has on media. In 1984, they also used paradoxical phrases to kind of cause a doublethink in the citizens so that they're relying only on the government to tell them what's true and what's not true. And that can be war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. So all that doesn't make sense. Now, in Sunrise on the Reaping, they say peacekeepers equal peace. And now that's not inherently paradoxical. However, we know that peacekeepers are this violent, militaristic law enforcement group that doesn't really mean peace. It just means quiet.
And peace is also relative. Are people's lives where they're starving to death and being reaped once a year to have their children murdered on live television, would you call that peace?
And that's the thing. What do you consider peace? Is it the lack of war, or is it everyone living a life worth living?
I feel like Pan Am is constantly at war with itself, in kind of the same nature that the United States was with Russia during the Cold War. But the tensions definitely lead to what we have called a war in even our own history.
And in this propaganda, President Snow takes this big brother-like stance. So another interesting example of like a connection, the emotional manipulation used in both 1984 and in Sunrise on the Reaping. For 1984, they have the 2 minutes of hate. For those of you who do not know, it's when they have 2 minutes and they basically just shout and scream and cry at this image of their big enemy, Emmanuel Goldstein. And it allows them to get out their frustrations and they put it towards something productive, towards the enemy. In Sunrise on the Reaping, you can see this in the Hunger Games by the way they are pitting the districts against each other rather than pitting them towards the Capitol, who is doing the Hunger Games to them.
They're creating a scapegoat.
Yes, exactly. And for the final similarity, I wanted to talk about how the telescreens in 1984 are similar to the forced viewings of the Hunger Games in Sunrise on the Reaping.
Why is it that you compare the telescreens to that?
Because the telescreens are everywhere and you are being forced to consume what they're putting out. Now, with the Hunger Games, they are not everywhere, but you are forced to watch them. So you're forced to consume the propaganda. It's just not as consistent with the Hunger Games. Now, the telescreens are worse, obviously, because they're intaking information as well and making sure you're watching. With the Hunger Games, you can look away, but you're still having to hear the screams of the tributes as they die.
Yeah, I feel like the reaping can more easily be compared to that of the public hangings that they're forced to watch.
Yeah, that definitely makes a better connection. I agree. So for the first difference, I wanted to talk about the tone of the propaganda and control used by each of the governments in 1984 and in Sunrise on the Reaping, or the Hunger Games. So for the Hunger Games, they definitely kind of tried to seduce you into intaking the propaganda. They make it flashy, it's pageantry, it's like a reality TV show even. Now in 1984, it's not like that at all. It's much more bleak. You are forced to intake the propaganda at all points of the day, and it's all about submission. It's all about no individuality. In 1984, the propaganda is more about the fear of suffering, and that's how they get their submission.
I think about how glorified the Hunger Games are, how like it's on the TV and how like they're basically seen like superheroes and superstars. In 1984, like a lot of the nuances of it are a lot more hush-hush than that.
It's almost like Pan Am doesn't have the resources that 1984 government has.
Winston and whatever revolt wouldn't actually ever happen in the world of 1984. They really do just have like an iron grip on the country. Who knows if the proletariats really feel the way he thinks they do, but we only really have his perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Which his perspective via the propaganda that's provided makes them feel like a unbeatable enemy.
Yeah, and I feel like that's where Pan Am kind of slips up. They went about it a different way. They don't have as strong of a grip on the people. They fall in the end because of that.
They're forced into having to do goofy things to be able to maintain power, like the Hunger Games, which gives the majority a lot more capability of making them look stupid. The Capitol ends up getting made stupid a lot, and you really don't get that out of the 1984 world. And again, I'm not sure if it's because it's just Winston's perspective or they really do have that firm of a grip on everything.
Yeah, I don't know. He's definitely an unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
And with the Hunger Games, we've had 3 points of view. So we kind of have a more solid view on how the government is working. Speaking of the Capitol having less resources than Big Brother, the surveillance that they do is totally different. In Panem, they use selective surveillance, where they only really watch after the victors, known rebels, people of interest, but they're not really watching the average person. In 1984, Big Brother is always watching you. Always, no matter who you are. It's universal surveillance, and that would require a lot more work and a lot more money. It would require a lot more resources in order to watch everybody all the time, everywhere.
Yeah, and I feel like that's really shown whenever the victors are the major pieces to the revolution, and they weren't even surveilled enough to be able to circumvent that. Even Plutarch Heavensbee, as close as he is to President Snow, still outwit the Capitol.
Yeah, it is kind of strange. I think it can be attributed to the fact that he was watching Katniss that whole time. I think that's all it is. His attention was diverted to Katniss, and they wanted that.
It really feels like Snow's the major thing holding all of it together. That he is really the main peacekeeper to stay consistent to how they call him. Whereas with Big Brother is the idea. He is the oligarchy, the power, the people with power. And it's a lot easier to maintain power whenever you have that much cohesion.
And that is a big difference between the books. Snow is a real person with faults, and he can slip up sometimes. Big Brother, he's always there, he's always watching, he's not real, and yet he is as real as needed. So that kind of leads into the enemies of the state for both Sunrise on the Reaping or the Hunger Games and 1984. In 1984, they make up Emmanuel Goldstein. It's not proven. It's pretty obvious, though, that he's not a real person and he's just a fictional character that they use to divert all the people's hatreds towards. In Panem, they use the rebels of old to push everyone's fears towards. And once Katniss comes forward to be the leader of the rebellion, they push everything onto her. All their hatred, all their fear. They hate her, even though she didn't really do anything. She's just the 17-year-old girl.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the major faults of the Capitol.
And finally, I feel like that leads into the goal of the propaganda used in each of these worlds. In Panem, the Capitol uses propaganda to divide the districts against themselves in order to prevent another uprising. And that's because there was an uprising before. It's a valid fear for the Capitol. And I feel like that is totally different from 1984, where they just want to crush individuality to the point where there's nothing left to fight for so that nobody fights against the government.
Yeah, and I feel like it just kind of comes down to that these books did come out at different times. So 1984 doing something so like demonstrably sinister was like acceptable, like it was new.
Yeah, and I also think that it has to do with what they were representing at the time. So the Cold War was going on. There was a lot of tension between like communism and freedom and everything like that. That book was made in response to that. Sunrise on the Reaping was made in response to something else. I think that's all the differences and similarities we were going to go over today. If you guys can think of any more, please drop them in the comments. If you like this video, give it a like. If you like us, go ahead and hit subscribe. We make a lot of stuff like this. And we'll see you next video. I think that's all we have for today.
See ya.